Hey, y'all. I'm Bud Elliott, and this is Cover 3 College Football Summer School. We've done our research on the teams, and now we're bringing on the top team experts from the 247 Sports Network to help us fill in the blanks. Please follow us on Twitter at Cover 3 Podcast. That's Cover 3 Podcast. And leave us a 5-star review on Apple and Spotify. All right. Class is in session. Hey, y'all. Welcome back to the Cover 3 College Football Podcast. I'm Bud Elliott, and this is Summer School. And today, we're staying in my home state and talking a little Florida Gators with Jacob Rudner of Swamp247. Jacob, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, man, no doubt about it. Welcome to the beat. Exciting time to be a Florida Gator beat reporter at this point. They made a coaching change, out with Dan Mullen, in with Billy Napier from ULL, and he inherits a team that, by I think kind of a blending of the power ratings out there, was about 30th overall last year, but underperformed in close games, had some effort issues, I think, at times down the stretch. And fans in Florida have to be pretty excited about what Napier's been saying so far.
Yeah, he's definitely the kind of guy that wins the press conference. He knows what to say, and I think that fans have gotten a sense of that early. And not only that, but I think that the people that he's surrounded himself with have also done and said the right things. And now it's just kind of about seeing how they're going to parlay what they've said and kind of promises that they've made into results.
No doubt about it. So he inherits an offense that last year was 23rd nationally under a pretty good offensive coach. I mean, Dan Mullen had some issues recruiting, roster management, some motivational stuff, but I felt like offensive scheme-wise, he's usually pretty universally respected. And he has a nice quarterback there, Billy Napier does, in Anthony Richardson. Pretty freaky athlete, big-time arm, young. Napier and his offenses do kind of have a history with the running quarterback stuff, particularly at ULL. Is he the front runner for the job at this point, or would you also factor in Jack Miller, the Ohio State transfer?
No, I think we're well beyond competition at this point. I think it's pretty clear that it's Anthony Richardson's job, barring something completely unforeseen. And that was made abundantly clear during the spring game. Anthony Richardson looked fantastic. He threw for over 200 yards in basically 3 quarters of play. And Jack Miller actually really struggled in that game. So I think that the gap that existed between the two of them entering the spring was only made larger in the final outing of their springs. And, I don't think that Jack Miller is an unserviceable quarterback, but it's very clear that he is the backup.
No doubt about it. I'm excited to see what Richardson does there. In the passing game, so they lose Jacob Copeland, they lose, Kamari Gamble, they lose Rick Wells, and then they threw a heck of a lot of passes to the backs last year in Davis and Pierce. They were actually, I think, 5th and 6th on the team in targets. Who do you see stepping up here? I look at the roster and I see some names that I really liked as recruits. Justin Shorter, I think, was always that, hey, looks like Terrell Owens, moves like Terrell Owens. Can he actually catch the ball consistently? And then they have Henderson and Trent Whittemore. Who do you see stepping up for them to potentially become a number one, or maybe somebody I didn't even mention?
Yeah, I think the first person you mentioned actually is the guy. I think Justin Shorter, it's going to come down to whether or not he's able to kind of live up to that hype, become the number one receiving threat for this football team. And he knows that too. We talked to him throughout the spring, and he basically said point blank that I need to step up and I need to be that number one guy. And I think that that's the expectation. You mentioned Henderson, you mentioned Whittemore. Those are also guys who are going to have to be productive for Billy Napier. I also think that they're looking in the transfer portal to potentially supplement that wide receiver room, because it was arguably one of the weaker units on the team. And we're just going to have to see how that shakes out before we can really make a determination, I think, on who is going to be a top target for this team. But that being said, I do think it's going to come down to whether or not Justin Shorter can look and play and act like a number one receiver.
No doubt about it. It has to improve on a 61% catch rate, because I feel like you watch him run routes and it's like, whoa, that's right. a different looking dude, and really kind of always has been. With the running backs, as I mentioned, they lost Davis and Pierce. I am curious though, because they've taken some high profile transfers in each of the last 2 years, in Lorenzo Lingard from Miami, and then DeMarcus Bowman from Clemson. Are any of those guys making noise? I mean, so far they haven't done much in their Florida careers, but I always liked them as recruits, so I'm curious.
Lorenzo Lingard, actually, I thought had a standout spring. We didn't really get to see much of him during the spring game due to a minor injury that the team basically just decided it would be best and safest to kind of limit his reps throughout that. And that was a bit disappointing because of the quality of spring practices that I think he put together. He looked really good, just the sharpest, most decisive looking running back on the team, in my opinion, during the observation windows that we had during practices. And granted, I will say that those were only 15 minutes long, so take from that what you will. But it was still impressive, and it was quite clear that he was the best looking guy on the field. We heard really good things about Montrell Johnson. And he's a guy who I think could emerge as we get closer to the season as potentially the number one guy in that room. But I would say that as a whole, that's a really strong looking unit with 4 guys who could potentially play: Lingard, Bowman, Naquan Wright, and Montrell Johnson. But the 2 guys who you mentioned, Bowman and Lingard, I think they had productive springs, Lingard especially.
And obviously, anybody taking a handoff from Richardson is going to benefit from the defense having to pay attention to Anthony's running ability as well. Curious here on the offensive line. So you do lose, James Lance, who I know on Twitter, Florida fans didn't necessarily always love, but the numbers were okay. And then, Reese obviously was a very veteran dude. But you get Torrance and the 6'7" guy from ULL,
Cameron Waits.
There we go. And Ethan White is back, correct? After having the injury last year?
Yeah.
They only played in 8 games. Am I wrong to think this offensive line could even be better?
No, I don't think you are. I think that this is a group that has a lot of potential. I think it remains to be seen whether or not they're going to be able to put that together. And that's not me saying that we didn't see positive things throughout the spring, but that kind of goes back to my previous comment of the observation was really limited. And beyond that, we're going off of what the coaches are saying, and they're never going to come out and say, yeah, the offensive line's looking pretty terrible, and, we're going to have problems at that position. And so, it's hard to really go off of what we saw and what we're hearing. That being said, I do agree that there's a lot of potential in the room. I like Osiris Torrance a lot. We heard things both publicly and then, behind the scenes from our sources at Swamp247 that Osiris Torrance had a really standout spring. I had one coach on Florida's coaching staff even tell me that he thought Osiris Torrance was the best looking offensive lineman in the room, the most SEC ready player. And that's super encouraging for a guy who has never played SEC football before. So I would say that there's a lot of potential. They have 2 offensive line coaches, Rob Sale and Darnell Stapleton. I think dividing things up the way that they have between the 2 of them has allowed players to develop a lot more rapidly throughout the spring, just because they get more individualized attention. And so now it's just going to come down to what they look like in fall camp and how that translates into the season. But from the spring, I'd say it's really hard to kind of take anything concrete away.
The division there, is that guard and centers one and tackles tight ends the other?
No, actually, they haven't done it that way. It's been kind of randomized. And then even during practices, we observed them switching at points. So there would be a group of about half of the linemen together working on one skill development drill, and the other group would be doing something else. And then about halfway through even the 15-minute period that media was allowed to observe, they would switch, Stapleton and Sale would. And it would allow the players to kind of hear from both guys, understand different opinions. I overheard at one point a conversation where they even said, let's see what Coach Sale thinks about this, or let's see what Coach Stapleton thinks about this. And then they would swap positions. And apparently they're doing that in the film room too. They're allowing guys to really hear from both coaches, get multiple opinions. And the reason that they did that is because they're trying to model it after an NFL coaching staff. I mean, you have 2 offensive line coaches in the NFL. They said that they wanted to do that at Florida. And that's something that I think that they were able to successfully do, which was appealing to both the players and to recruits based on the feedback that we heard.
You think about the other position groups that are that size, and most teams are going to carry somewhere between like 15 and 18 offensive linemen. DBs often, have a similar number, and then they oftentimes have 2 position coaches. Most teams are going to split up D tackles, D ends, unless they play an odd front. So I could see how that would work. It's interesting that the switch you noted. Speaking of switching to defense here. While the offense fell off a little bit last year, and it would be hard not to off of the tremendous offense they had in 2020 that took Alabama to the wire in the SEC title game, the defense last year really kind of fell off. At 39th overall, Todd Grantham's unit definitely had some struggles, particularly in the run game. And that's kind of where I want to start here, because Carter, Valentino, Newkirk, Truesdale are all gone up front. And that's 1,350 snaps at interior defensive line who are gone. So my question is, I trust Dexter. I mean, like, that dude I think has total stud ability, unless I'm wrong there. Who else is going to play defensive tackle for this team?
Well, I think you and I are going to find out at the same time, but I think that that's a
Okay.
position group that they are trying to supplement and they're still kind of trying to find their way with. We know that Maryland transferred Daryl Jackson is actually visiting. You and I are talking on Tuesday, April 22nd, 26th, excuse me. He's visiting this weekend, and they really need a guy who's going to be able to come in and potentially provide some snaps right away. And Billy Napier didn't hide that at all. He basically said throughout the spring that that's a unit that they feel is pretty thin. He lumped that in with wide receiver, safety, inside linebacker was another position that he said they really do need to supplement. And that remains to be the case. Javon Dexter looked phenomenal throughout the spring. I think that he's really starting to pick up as a guy who people are starting to hear nationally, not just in the SEC or locally in Florida. And there's a reason for that. He looked really impressive, especially during the spring game, stopping the run particularly. And beyond that, I think it kind of remains to be seen as to who's going to step up and be the second guy next to Dexter. And that might not be something that we learn until we're deeper into fall camp or even towards the beginning of the season.
Seems fair to label that kind of concern number one with a bullet for this team at this point.
Concern I think is a strong word. I think it's difficult to tell because as we learn about things with this team, I think the coaching staff is too, just because of the change. And they haven't had that much exposure to these guys yet. You have 4 weeks of spring ball, 14 practices in a spring game, and how much can you really glean from that confidently? It's difficult. And so I would say that it's an area that's going to need to be watched going into fall camp. And I think it's going to be something that this coaching staff is trying to fix, going into that, A, with the guys that they have in-house, but B, with whoever they're able to bring into the program, which is something we know that they're trying to do. And so that's going to be, I think it's a topic, but it's not a concern yet, I don't think.
I found it interesting that you listed off receiver, safety, and defensive tackle. Because I look at linebacker and I see Bogle, Diabate, Hopper, Moon, Burney are all gone, right? Unless one of those guys came back that I missed. That's like 2,000 snaps at the linebacker / buck position last year that don't return. Are they feeling better about this spot, you think, than I realize they are?
So Burney is coming back.
Burney is back. Okay.
Yeah, Burney's back. I think that they feel okay about the unit. And we talked to their linebackers coaches, both of them during spring. And one of the things that they said that they were really focusing on was just starting over and working on tackling, for example. They felt like based on what they saw from last year, based on the guys who they have in-house, they need to kind of focus on fundamentals with this group. And Billy Napier did say that they are potentially looking to add an inside linebacker through the transfer portal. So, and that's a theme. I feel like I'm saying this a lot, but I'll make it concise and really talk about the point here. Billy Napier has said on multiple occasions that they do not feel good about the depth with this team. He said it explicitly on several occasions, and he says that they're going to fix that both through the transfer portal immediately and with their recruiting class. They're out on the trail right now, visiting schools and talking to players. And that's how they feel like they're going to fix it. But at the moment, they feel kind of across the board like this team lacks depth. And it's at those positions that I mentioned. And inside backer, defensive tackle, safety, wide receiver are among those spots.
Last one here as far as position questions. I look at the defensive back room and I feel like they lose Kyer Elam, who was a stud when he was healthy, and they get Kimber from Georgia. This should be a strength, right? Am I missing something here?
No, I don't think you are. I think that this is a room that has a lot of potential. I think the coaching staff sees that, and it was pretty clear throughout the spring that was the case. Those players I think that they just looked athletic. They looked sharp for the most part. You mentioned Kimber. He actually had a great spring game. And it was a unit that really stood out, I would say, from beginning to end of spring ball. I think that they feel as though they have room to add a safety potentially through the portal, but it's not like a desperate need. I think that they want maybe just that for a number to get another body into the mix here. But yeah, no, I would agree with you that that's probably your strength if you're looking at the defense overall right now and the unit that you can feel most confident about.
Awesome. Jacob Rudner, Swamp247. Really appreciate you joining us here on the Cover 3 Podcast Summer School Series. We'll have to have you back to preview the team come fall. We'll see what else happens in the transfer portal. And it's an exciting time in Gainesville with the start of the Billy Napier era.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right, that's the bell. Cover 3 College Football Summer School is over for today. But don't worry, we'll be back soon with even more episodes filling you in on the top teams in college football. Please give us those 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Follow us on YouTube and on Twitter at Cover3 Podcast, and we'll see y'all soon.